I'm incredibly excited because running a business and being an entrepreneur is like 20 years of therapy packaged into one day, and us learning how to navigate ourselves, run our own lives, and change our perspective around it is what gives us the tools to be able to succeed. And on today's show, I have my dear friend Sascha, who is a mindset queen, but she's also clinically trained and over 20 years as a psychologist and helps entrepreneurs navigate the ups and downs and the in and outs. And we talk about everything, heart to heart conversation about how acknowledging feelings of overwhelm is crucial for progress, how self-care is foundational for effective decision making, how daily habits, the importance of them, can keep harmony and balance in life and business, the power of state change and how it can lead to better clarity and decision making, how we reassess business models and how it keeps us in alignment, how we can connect with one's mission, like our own mission, to provide motivation and clarity. And it goes into so much nuance of things that I've shared on the show that are personal anecdotes for me, but also for her, both from her own learned and lived experience, as well as her clinical experience in helping so many people over the last 2 decades navigate the psychologies of being an entrepreneur, how self-acceptance is a journey that requires patience and understanding. Small intentional steps are crucial for growth, how we build episodic memory to develop resilience, and all the parts and pieces that allow us to stay in the driver's seat of our life and of our business. And one of the things that I heard the other day that really landed, and this episode puts it all into practice, is our feelings get to ride, not drive. And so this will help you understand yourself, give you small actionable tips, tools, tricks, and all the trades to have that life and business that you desire in the deepest level of alignment. And we have a board certified, clinically, awesomely trained expert telling us all the answers. And so without further ado, let's get into the show. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Mind of George Show. And I'm honored and already emotional to have today's guest. And I think there's 2 ways I'm going to do this intro. But first, I'm going to give you a little bit of context because I know where we're going. And there's a lot of things in the air right now when it comes to entrepreneurship: doubt, fear, insecurity. I want to throw in the towel. I'm not cut out to do this anymore. And I think we're seeing this prominent symptom popping up of realizing that we are at the driver's seat of our business, but the world in which we do business changes quite often. And your perspective in that situation is what dictates you either being in your prison or in your power. And today's guest, I'll do the personal side first, is somebody who I connect with very deeply on the other side of the world, who also happens to hold degrees and expertise that I don't have labels in, but has been there for me in some of my darkest times. And we've had incredible conversations and perspective shifts. But she's also an absolute master at what she does. She's a doctor of clinical psychology, and her specialty is supporting entrepreneurs, myself included, founders and leaders, to harness the power of their mind, their brain, and their body for peak performance. And I've dealt with a lot of psychologists in my life, and I've had a lot of conversations with people. And today we have Sascha on the show, and I will call her Dr. Sascha, and we'll unpack if she doesn't want the doctor label or not. But truthfully, this incredible woman has helped me in some trying times. And even before we hit record today, just catching up and sharing from our heart and talking about faith and perspective, as not only does she talk the talk, but I know her personally and she walks the walk. And there's just like this ever amount of peace and love and acceptance and safety that comes over me every time that we speak. And I resonate deeply with every word that she shares. And so I'm honored and excited to welcome Sascha to the show. So Sascha, welcome to the show.
Thank you, George. My gosh, I feel very emotional and very lost for words. Thank you. What a incredibly kind and generous introduction. And I think I feel the same. And the connection, which wasn't that long ago, again over the waves, never in person, was really immediate for me in terms of I think the words that you just said, although they're sort of escaping me a bit because I am overwhelmed with emotion, and we'll probably come back to that in a moment about what that does and what that means for our business. But your authenticity and your vulnerability in sharing, and we were just talking about this before we came on board, the reality of life and of being a human. And there's so much in this world, particularly in the online world and the online space, that pulls us away from those truths that then as a result, and I see this so much in my practice, clinical practice, coaching practice, that sets up these really unrealistic and certainly just not even, I don't know who's setting these standards. We're setting them ourselves to these imaginary people or things or entities about who we should be, how we should be, what life should look like, i.e., smooth sailing, no crappy things happening. Um, when the reality is life happens, and that is life, and that is exciting as much as it is heartbreaking and challenging in the moment of navigating it.
Yeah, yeah. And I love to, like, for every ounce of your background, like 23 years in like actual clinical psychology, but also as an entrepreneur and somebody who embodies and lives the entrepreneur who navigates your own challenges. Like, it, for everybody listening, this might seem like it's a friend catch up. I just can't wait to hug this woman in person one day. And I love how I say this woman, like you're not in front of me, hug you in person one day. Um, because to your point too, and I think it's really, really insane because unilaterally to how long you've been in this, like in 15 years of entrepreneurship, the thing that I continually see in the why doesn't even matter is just this like continual disconnection from allowing humanity to exist, like not having the checked boxes or having the even keel in the water, but it's almost like we've removed the ability for somebody to just be allowed to be a human, like to not have all the answers or not have it all together, or even be messy in the process. And this is something that you and I were talking about before this, where it's like there's also no finish line in it. Like I know for me, I was sharing that like my most powerful moments in life have come from being what we would call authentic, but really it's owning and loving myself for where I am. And every time a new challenge arises or a situation in that life that we navigate and we build businesses for throws a monkey wrench in, and then it's like my voice gets suppressed, or I have a new fear, or are they going to judge me? But truthfully, it's like me judging myself and putting these crazy expectations on things. And I don't know why, nor do I care why, but I know I stand for something different. And one of the things that I love about us, and every time we connect, it's like the moment we jumped on, you're like, how are you? I'm like, here's where everything is. And you're like, okay, me too. And I feel like that's such a missing aspect, both in entrepreneurship, but also in community. And it's something that I just want to change the conversation around, because I feel like the more we love and support each other for where we are and who we are authentically, the faster things shift and we get to have the things that we want.
Yes, yes. And I feel that on a like an individual level or within our own little unit or community even, but on a global level, I firmly believe that, George, if we can sort this stuff out ourselves, which I think is what you're saying,
Yeah.
through these conversations, allowing and hopefully allowing others to feel and think and express themselves similarly, that's where big change is going to happen. And I firmly believe that. And I always get the goosies and the shivers when I say things like that, which for me means it's real. And if we, that
Mm-hmm.
collective energy does mean something.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, I got to give you kudos too, just for saying that, but it triggered my brain. Everybody, it's 5:30 in the morning for Sascha when we're recording this. So I also thank you for waking up at like the brink of dawn to come share your magic and expertise with us. And to your point too about the collective, I think there's this thing that I've realized, and it's a reminder of a fortune cookie that I say in my head all the time. But a personal development coach said it to me like 15 years ago, and they're like, "If it's up to be, it's up to me." And I think the thing that I see is people passively waiting for the conversation to change instead of actively engaging and changing it. And one of the things I appreciate you is how active you are in having it, but also the lead that you take in doing it. And I want to ask you a question about this, because I referenced this at the beginning of the show, but I know personally for me, and we both coach entrepreneurs and help entrepreneurs, it seems like in the last 6 months, the thing that I've heard more than anything, and I mean, it's almost on the daily now, is I just want to give up in my business, or I just want to give up in this habit, or this thing isn't serving me anymore. I can't figure it out. And I don't know what's in the water. I don't know what's happening, but that conversation has been at the forefront of almost every coaching conversation I've had. And I know this is something that you drastically help people navigate, and steps and understanding that. So can you kind of start to unpack that for me? Because I feel like it's such a relevant topic right now.
Yes.
So with this symptom that I'm seeing a lot of I want to throw in the towel. I don't want to run my business anymore. I don't want to do this. This is something you help people navigate so often and so frequently, and it's kind of right up your vein and alley. So would you mind like start to unpack that for us so we can start to give some people some tangible steps?
Yes, most definitely, George. And again, as we're sort of saying, and we've been discussing already, I really bring a personal lens and experience to this journey as well. So as you said, yes, I have all the psych training, and just to, I guess, contextualize that in terms of, because it is different in some regards when people come, and I think there's an expectation around seeing a clinical psychologist that you have to have a certain diagnosis or situation that you're in terms of your mental state. And yeah, that there are those stereotypes, but really it's a discipline of understanding ourselves and our psychology and our experience and what makes life hard and also then what makes it easier. However, I guess where I was going with that is, so yes, I have that knowledge and experience, but I am also navigating entrepreneurship. I am navigating life, of course, but entrepreneurship too. And I've very much been on that journey this year. To be honest, it's been across the majority of this year where it has been very much that up and down flow.
Mommy, Rosie's on the other side of the dam. Mom, Rosie's
We,
on that side of the dam.
Okay.
Can
Sorry,
I keep
George.
going?
you're good.
Love, please shut the door. Do not come back.
The boy said you were.
Shut the door.
You drive away.
No, darling. So sorry.
No, you're good. Just take a breath and then start where you were.
So yeah, it's
So
very
you've been
much been
navigating this up and down. Yep.
up and down, and so I think the first point in terms of navigating this is the acknowledgement, as you're doing now and we're doing in this conversation, to say that that's actually really normal across a whole ranges of aspects of our life, but I think particularly for entrepreneurship. And I think I just want to come to almost like the conclusion of this conversation and then work backwards,
Yeah.
which is to say the only way, in my opinion, and please check me on this if you think differently, the only way in my mind that you fail in entrepreneurship is if you give up.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we then work backwards from that, what do you need to do in order to not give up? Firstly, it's to say, and this is again sort of 101 psychology stuff, is to acknowledge what it is that you're thinking and what that's doing to what you're feeling and how that's impacting potentially your actions. It's very simple, but I think we often, and again, sometimes, and psychology I know this, we've connected on this point too, have this tendency to overcomplicate these messages. But really, in terms of our experience of being a human, putting aside all of the big stuff, faith and spirit and soul and all of that, but in terms of what we're consciously aware of and not so much, being mindful that our thoughts strongly impact how we feel in our emotional state, and then what that is in our body that drives our action. So just that acknowledgement to then say, okay, what am I saying to myself? What am I thinking? What am I feeling? And not judging that, not getting hung up on that because I'm thinking and feeling like this is all really hard because it's true, doesn't mean we have to take what might seem like the logical step, which is right to go, oh, okay, I'm thinking that, I'm feeling that, therefore I must, A, be not good enough. We cycle into another series of thoughts. Well, there's the evidence. This is hard, therefore I'm not cut out for this.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm jumping around a little bit there, but I guess my first point is just that acknowledgement, acceptance that then flows from that to say having those thoughts is actually a typical part of entrepreneurship. It's a typical part of life. We're more likely to have that in entrepreneurship by the nature of the space that we're in, which is we're in it for a reason, but sometimes when we're in it, we lose sight of that. So that's I think my first point. I think I sort of had in my mind about five action steps, but this is really the overriding one that says, A, acknowledge, just acknowledge and therefore accept and know that it's normal to think and feel this way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that, because I'm glad that you gave context to the whole situation and went to the finish line too, because, you know, just through my own experience, not through psychology, but studying all the other pieces, right? The big trap, and to your point, in entrepreneurship is like the only time you fail is when you stop. And I see stopping as also stagnation, right? When we're not taking intentional
Yes.
action to rectify, right? So
Yeah.
like what we're not changing, we're choosing. And to your point, and I think the most important point for me, the biggest mistake that I made is that when I would have those thoughts and I would have those feelings and I would have those doubts, I would also internalize them and have fault, blame, guilt, and shame. And it would become this cycle of like
Yes.
self-sabotage over and over and over.
Yeah.
When in actuality, every single successful person I know, every one of my mentors, everybody I've interviewed, in the same vein, they have this correlation of the more success they have, the louder and louder that noise gets,
Yes.
because it's an increasing line and there isn't a remediation of it. To your point, it's really an acknowledgement of it, because it gives us a current state. And then the acceptance of it is having gratitude for the information at hand. It's
Yes.
the way that I do it for my own
Yes.
simple brain is like, I treat it like I'm the triage nurse. And I'm like, well, if I'm making up this story, if I'm feeling this, there's something in me that is being triggered or tickled, as I like to say. I like the frame of tickled better. And if I can remove myself from it or separate from it slightly, I can look at that information and choose what to take action on. And I heard this quote the other day from a pastor. And when we talk about entrepreneurship, to your point, is that no matter what, entrepreneurship is uncertain. There's going to be fear, there's going to be doubts, there's going to be limitations,
Yes.
just like in life. And he's like, yeah. So this analogy that I heard from a pastor was so incredibly powerful, because he was like, imagine you're a boat in the ocean, and he's like, the water around you is fear, insecurity, doubt, right? Which is truthfully every ounce of life in entrepreneurship, all these things that are around us that influence us. And he said, but the boat never has an issue as long as it stays around the boat. It's only when you let it in the boat that the boat sinks and it's challenged. And it was a really powerful perspective to me, because what I realized with myself is that anytime there was a struggle, or I lost a client, or I was like, God, this offer isn't working anymore, when I would have those stories and those doubts and I'd ruminate on them, where I started to believe them or have a charge with them or be like, God, you're a failure, or you're a blank, or you're an X, is when I would let that water into the boat. And then that's where I would get stagnant and stop and not be able to take intentional action. So I love that you framed it like you framed it, and starting with the end in mind. And so first action step, acknowledge that it's there, accept that it's there. And then where do we go from there?
And just to add to that, George, to accept that it's normal. So, and accept that it's normal. And I think what you said is very powerful. And I just want to reinforce it, because I think it's one of these things that we dismiss as maybe, as I categorize myself, emerging entrepreneur. So maybe in those early stages, or further down the line as well. But is that everybody else, regardless of level, is having the same experience. So, and to hear that from you and from all the other people at a very high level that you work with, that they're also sharing that same experience. So that can then help with that acknowledgement. But what it helps with practically, and I am sort of jumping ahead a bit, but this is the time it relates to what we're talking about, is to build your evidence bank of truth about this particular situation or experience, which is having the thought, having the belief that that this is all too hard. I'm not cut out for this because I'm thinking this way and I'm feeling this way. What we can do is zoom out, is the metaphor that I like. That is, step back out of our experience and look at the reality. What is the truth about what's going on here? And with references, which is what you've just shared, and what I know to be true of my own personal experience and the people and the women and men that I work with, is we have an insight into the depths of what goes on in people's minds. And we can say without a doubt that everybody else is in the same boat, to use the metaphor in a slightly different way. So that's the part of that. So the acknowledgement, acceptance that it is normal. And then where I go, my first really practical step, and it's a really boring one. I say this all the time. It's not what people want to hear. It's not flashy. It's probably not Instagram worthy in many respects. And what we have to acknowledge is the reality of our human experience. What I mean by that is biologically and neurobiologically. When we're at the point that we feel like giving up and we're having the thoughts of giving up, generally that says to me that we're in a state of some degree of overwhelm. And when let's break down what overwhelm is. It generally means that our brain isn't in the right state of mind to be, as you said, intentional or making decisions or being creative and thinking the way out of the problem. So that's another point of acknowledgement, is saying, okay, when you're at this point, if you're at that point, it means that you're not in balance. And that's sort of, I guess, the first step of my framework is we have to try, not have to, I say there is no other way out of this as a first step, that really taking an honest look at how you're looking after yourself. So my model for this, I think we share again a love for acronyms and models and frameworks. So my simple one for this that I've added to probably since we last spoke, which is N.E.S.T.S.S, N-E-S-T, and I'm up to 3 S's. So N.E.S.T.S.S. Do a check-in. These are your nests, your foundation of being able to function as a human being. Again, we try and skip over this and go, oh, how can I think my way and work myself out of this from a state of mind and body where we can't actually do it. So as much as we want to go into problem solving and go into solutions or looking at alternatives, like, okay, I'm not going to do this anymore, I'm going to go back to the 9 to 5 or whatever. Slow down, stop, let's look at your nests. So N is nutrition and hydration. I'll just run through them quickly. E, exercise and movement. S, sleep and rest. T, time alone, time with others. Support, first S. Second S is stage of your cycle. That's particularly for women, but also that there's an overlay for men as well. And then S, season of life that you're in. So doing, if nothing else, in the first instance, an audit, a check-in on how well you're looking after those domains of your life. And I suspect that if you're at the brink of giving up and that sort of burnout experience, there's a lot there that is out of whack, to put it. I hope that comes across the waters, that saying of out of whack. Yeah. So probably not eating very well, probably not even just drinking enough water, certainly not moving your body in the way that it needs to flush through life, stress, cortisol, adrenaline, all the stuff. So coming back, doing an audit and I say, what do you need to do to sort of really shore up those basics? So if we think about your metaphor of the boat, where are the holes there on a really foundational level, and shore those up? And I know that is easier, way easier said than done. However, for me, you're only going, all the other steps to follow will really depend on those foundations. And I see in clinical practice, in entrepreneurial practice, that everyone really wants to skip over that. It's not glamorous, as I said. So it's coming back to those basics, looking at your daily routines, your daily habits, and to some degree just focusing on that. So the metaphor, it's not a metaphor, but the little phrase I have around that is almost what do you need to do, like to tap out to be able to fuel up? Yeah. So what balls can you intentionally drop? And this is going to be different for all different contexts and businesses and spaces of working. But for me in my business, when I felt like this, it was like, okay, what are the things that I do need to keep ticking away to keep money coming in? I'm a single mum, as you know, George, of a number of kids. So the buck stops with me. I don't have anything or anyone else that I can tap into. So when I say these things, I'm coming from that lived experience. So I can't just say, oh, I'm just completely going, which I often say to my clients, if I could, what I would recommend, prescribe to you, is that you completely go and rest and tap out of life refuel, come back at it. But the reality for most of us is that we can't do that.
Yeah.
But how can you do that strategically or in a good enough sort of a way so that you can come back to some of those basics? Attend to the low-hanging fruit of your business that is going to be fueling, keeping money coming in the bank. And also I would say, and this is maybe, I don't know, you again, check me on this, George, of doing what you need to get through in those moments. So for me, my business, that meant picking up parts of work that I had let go that weren't maybe, my ideal work, but they were work that I could easily tap into to keep the lights on in all manners of literal and metaphoric, keep the lights on so that I could keep my family going and myself going and enable me to address those basics that I had neglected, to then get into a better state of mind. And by state of mind, so it's actually state of brain and body. Our state of mind is determined by what's happening here, which is determined by what's happening here. And I'm not talking, yes, it's emotional, but it's on a really basic physiological level.
Yeah.
That what happens here is going to make sure that we're working optimally in our prefrontal cortex, the top part of our brain, the upstairs part of our brain, not the downstairs.
Yeah. Yeah. I love this. I have nothing to check you on. I do want to acknowledge this though. Like part of me is so glad that you're here. Like I play mommy daddy games. I'm like, hey, I'm not the psychologist, but listen to what mommy said because she's right. The way that I would categorize that, because I also want to make this tangible and tie together. And so much of this resonates with me. And to your point, I have so many little mantras that I say to myself, like fortune cookies, right? And one of the ones that carried me for years is never allow temporary feelings to create permanent undesirable results.
Yes.
Right. And to your point, and if I'm even tying this together of what we talked about already, like it doesn't matter if you feel like you want to throw in the towel in your business, or it could just be you're frustrated or you're overwhelmed or you're tapped or, you're ruminating and spiraling, you're in self-deprecation, you're in any of those buckets. The way that I would summarize this down is that like step number one is like you get to fully acknowledge that where you are is exactly okay. And the analogy I would use is like you're just putting a pin in the map to say this is where I currently am, because if you want to be somewhere different, you have to know where you are. And in putting that pin in the map, it's not making it wrong. It's just utilizing it as a symptom or information to identify where you are so that you can be aware of where you want to go. And then how I would summarize what you said, and this is something I'm so bullish on, is after that acknowledgement, there's a level of state change that's needed, because the way that our biological body works and the way that your brain works, especially your reticular activating system, is it sees more of your current state. And so if you're in overwhelm, if you're in justification, if you're in self-deprecation, everything around you is going to allow your unconscious mind to pick up more of that evidence because of the state that your body is in, right? And they did a study on this in like 1979 or something, but the numbers are relevant. My buddy TJ teaches this. We did it on a podcast. But they figured out that like the unconscious mind filters like 11 million bits of information. But the conscious mind, to your point of the prefrontal cortex, chooses like 150 to grab onto. So that's like filling a dump truck with toothpicks and then grabbing a hand. And whatever our body is feeling is what our brain is going to focus on. So it's creating that state change, which, and I say this and I joke to people, have you ever like been in that, like, oh my God, like I feel like crap. I don't feel good. Everything's gone. Screw it. I'm going for a walk. And then magically you move your body and every doubt, fear, overwhelm that you had just magically lands in front of you with like a piece of clarity. When you're like, oh, that's where I am. It's because we changed the state of our body. And to your point that I want to add, and I would agree with you wholeheartedly, even in the military, one of the things that we are taught for combat and war is that when things get overwhelming, you shrink your world as small as possible to the things that you can control. Because the moment you take those actions, the momentum starts to build and you start to see things differently. So to your question and to your point, even when I've navigated this, and this happened 6 months ago when I was balling again. I had one-on-one clients left and right, and within 2 weeks, 3 clients that are like, we're with you forever, all had things happen in their life. And they're like, we need to end coaching. We need to end coaching. We need to end coaching. And I had let my foot off the gas pedal of my daily habits and my routines because I'm like, oh, we're good. I have some breathing room. I have boom. And I had an emotional meltdown. And I'll never forget it because that was like $30,000 a month of like, holy moly. And I cried and I vented, and it took about 6 hours. And then I was like, go for a walk. And I went on this walk and I just walked. And then it all started to hit me. I was like, oh, I stopped doing this. I was neglecting these low-hanging fruits. Oh, when I avoided that, it led to this because I wasn't aware of what was happening. And so that state change is huge. And to your point, in acknowledging the season that you're in, sometimes that is letting go of the illusion of control of all these parts and pieces that we think we need to run, because there might be 40 holes in the boat, to keep the same analogy, but 3 of them are filling up the majority of the water. And so to your point, I think that's where you start to have this awareness. And so you acknowledge where you are, you accept it, you utilize that information, you change your state. And one of those ways is using your N.E.S.T.S.S to hit all those buckets, because every one of those situations or every one of those buckets, whether it's your nutrition, your exercise, your sleep, right? All of those things are 100% in our control. And we can audit those and make decisions in there to care for ourselves, which will change our state and start to change our perspective. And it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to get the answer, but it's going to put you in a state to be able to look at it more clearly without being reactive to the emotion or the story at hand.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And just to put maybe some terms, just to flesh out what you then said, George, and I know you've talked about this many times before, but in changing your state, in moving your body particularly, what you're doing is you're not encouraging, you're facilitating the release of other neurochemicals that counteract those ones that are driving us towards, as you said, confirming what we already think, which is down, so the negativity bias and confirmation bias, which is fueled by adrenaline and cortisol. So when we move our body intentionally, and whether that be something hardcore in terms of strength training or simply walking, you're encouraging the release of other neurochemicals that are an antidote to those just by nature. So endorphins, oxytocin, serotonin, all the things, and they don't just come through movement, they come through environment as well, which is an important thing to be mindful of. That those things, that's why we get that, what you said is our perspective changes. Well, what changes is that our brain is actually optimally balanced. So just to use that metaphor of really simply thinking of our brain, of upstairs brain and a downstairs part of our brain, that's as complex as I go in terms of neurobiology. So much of what we're talking about is we're functioning from, or we're making decisions from, the downstairs part, which is fear, all the things that you said, basically. Fight or flight response has been activated. That's generally not where we do our best work, and we only want to be in that state of mind when we actually need to, state of brain and body, which is when we're under imminent threat of harm, much like you've experienced, and, you know, talking about the military experience in particular. That's what that's for. That's not for every day. So by doing these sorts of activities with those foundations of our nests, and then in the moment when we're overwhelmed, by moving our body, changing our state, we're rebalancing the brain to where it should be, which is we're functioning from those upper regions, which are responsible for creativity, innovation, problem solving, reasoning, all of those things that we need to be able to move through difficult times. So that's what, I guess that's sort of the backstory to perspective shift is your state shifts, which literally means your brain and your body are in an optimal state, and then you can zoom out. So I often say that metaphor of zooming out, of let's look at my experience more objectively, more rationally, what's going on here. And that's probably then leads into my second point, is to then, when you're in that state of mind, now depending on how low you've been or how overwhelmed you've been or frustrated or whatever it might be, will determine how long you need to be in that sort of first phase of shoring up the foundations to be able to then look at things more objectively. Mm-hmm. And then you can bring in your beautiful, wise, smart, all the things that we know that entrepreneurs have in spades, and look at the reality of where you're at. And is it that you might not need to do anything else. Mm-hmm. By resetting, you might go, okay, it's not really actually my business that is the issue. It's that life has happened and life is going to happen. And that then reinforces that strategy of, okay, I've let me rephrase that. In order to weather the storm, to not be flooded by the ocean around us, we have to have a dogged commitment. You said bullish, I say dogged, to those daily habits. Mm-hmm. If we are going to weather the storm of entrepreneurship, the reality of entrepreneurship, but also the reality of life. Mm-hmm. So my second point would be, when you're in that state of mind, it might take some time, depending on how low you've been, to be able to come back up. So the gauge on that would be is if you think, okay, I'm there, and then you start to try and think things through and you're spiraling again and you're going down the negativity pathway, you're not there. So you need to, again, be realistic with yourself, give yourself grace and space and time, as much as you can, to continue to recalibrate, then zoom out and look at the reality. And I do think this is probably a bit more business hat on though, but in that process, it might be, and this has been a journey that I've been on, and I think it is, again, the reality of entrepreneurship, is looking at what you've been doing and is it actually working for you? And when I say working for you, this will get into a little bit of some of that deeper stuff, but is it the right model? And I'm meaning more business model or offer model, if that's a thing, offer, for you and for your, I call it mind design. So what is important? What gets the best of you, your zone of genius almost in a way. But this is on a more foundational level, and I've been having this conversation a lot lately in a number of different forums in terms of sharing a bit of my experience around this, is that we share this similarity, George, but in different ways in terms of having a neuroatypical brain. But mine is more down the pathway of more towards the autism spectrum end of the continuum of neurodiversity, on top of a very introverted temperament. So people would see that as shy and not risk-taking, all the things that go probably against what you think an entrepreneur is. I can get super overwhelmed with certain sensory input, and I can also find certain social situations, i.e. the online space, really challenging. So rather than beat myself up about that, i.e. say, Sascha, you're never going to make it, you're not cut out for this, I go, my pathway, my thinking, my reframe, my analysis of myself is, this is who I am. And I have spent, to be honest, pretty much, I'm 46, probably a good 44 years of my life, I'm not joking, beating myself up for being the way that I am, pushing against that, pushing myself all the time to do all the things because society, the world tells me I need to be more out there, I need to be more loud, I need to be more definitive. When I do have some cause that I'm definitive about, but I also have a brain and a life experience that says there's so much that I don't know. So I do check in, and I do, maybe that means I do not look definitive sometimes, but I'm checking in, I'm trying to make sense of a whole lot of layers and information. So where am I going with this? I'm going with the fact that then I look at, okay, well, what works for me? I had an idea of, when I moved into not so much the entrepreneurial space, because I'd already made that step in terms of clinical practice and having my own business, but then evolving that into the digital space. which was driven by, and I'm just going to put a note to come back to this because it's my third point, my values and my mission in life, which is to have impact in the deepest way possible, but in the biggest way possible. That's what drives me, and particularly for generational change for women, children, and families is my creed, I guess. My mission is how can I do that? Because I'm in one-to-one work or one-to-one consultations with other therapists, and I'm having the same conversation over and over again. It's about a lot of these same things. People saying, I'm not good enough. Everyone else seems to have their, what together. What's wrong with me? And I'm saying there's actually nothing wrong with you. You're just having the human experience and thinking that that's not right. So I hope you're still with me. So moving then into thinking, okay, digital space, online space, reaching more people. How can I do that? So going down the pathway of something sort of big in terms of a membership, having big groups together. And that's really where I started from. And to the point then that it was a contributing factor towards me wanting to give up, because I was actually going against my nature, which is that's not where I do my best work, in big groups. I do my best work in this sort of environment, one-to-one or small groups. So that's where, that little bit of a rant went to say, okay, actually look at your business design, your offer design, and is it designed, is it aligned with your design? And not just doing what you think you need to do or other people tell you you should be doing, or you assume you should be doing because you're in the online space in particular, or you're in a particular business and that means you need to design it in a particular way. So that's my second, I think it's the second thing, is to actually really analyze when you're in the right state of mind. Is my business actually serving me? Is it serving? That's my third point. Maybe actually needing to come back and get really clear on, or for me in this place, it was reconnecting with what is my mission, what are my values that drive my mission, and is my business aligning with that? And I also want to say about the mission and values piece, for me, that is an incredibly motivating force when I talk about tapping into other neurochemicals that counteract the not so helpful ones that we need for a time, but not at these particular times. When I reconnect, and I'm doing it now, I close my eyes, I think about, I put my hand on my heart, what I'm here for, what my purpose is, what my mission is, I am flooded with all the feels. And I can break it down scientifically. I'm flooded with oxytocin, I'm flooded with serotonin, I'm flooded with endorphins that remind me, that empower me to say, this is why I'm here, this is why I'm doing the hard stuff, is because of this mission. And then in connecting with that, I am fueled, I am balanced, I'm optimized.
Okay, I'm with you, and I want to tie all these together because this is where my brain goes, and I love this, and we'll get into the next step. So step one is to truthfully acknowledge and accept where we are, while also using that perspective to be able to build like our resilience bank, remind us of times we've been in this, we've overcome this before.
Yes.
And not make reactive emotional decisions based on the evidence or the things that our brain are thinking, which would then lead us into state changing and checking basically the structural integrity of our boat and running through the N.E.S.S.S and saying, okay, how's my nutrition? How's, my movement? How's my sleep? How is my support system? And then when in that perspective, working towards changing our state to be able to process from a place of response versus reactivity. And in that bucket, then using that to align ourselves and really do some symptomatic work. And the three questions I like to ask myself are, what worked? Like, what are the things that I've done that have led me here that I enjoyed, that brought me joy, that worked? What didn't work? Meaning, like, every time I do these things, it leads to burnout or overwhelm, or I'm frustrated and I don't enjoy doing them. And what could I do differently? Well, keeping the lights on and proactively taking actions on what we can bite down. And then from that point, reminding ourselves of our why that's deeper than our circumstance, right? We're not the results that we create. We're the byproduct of the intentionality of our inputs, and having a why and reminding ourselves of our values or our vision or why we're doing what we're doing, to your point, scientifically, to reground ourselves and to re-energize ourselves. And like, there's a bigger mission, or there's a bigger purpose, or there's a bigger reason than the current situation. Like, I'm feeling like I hit a brick wall, but what I actually hit was a speed bump and an invitation for realignment. And where am I going with this? Is that a good synopsis so far?
Perfect.
Okay, cool.
Perfect. And I just so admire, just a bit of an aside, but your ability to, and this is part of my neurodiversion that is a challenge for me, is the integration of metaphors. And I just love, and I just wanted to acknowledge that you're such a master at bringing in the analogies and the metaphors to really, technical word, operationalize or bring to life a concept.
Yeah, thank you. And in that, I want to acknowledge like two things. Number one is that you said this early on, and the scientific part of this as well, and you have the clinical part of this as well. The biggest mistakes that I made in my life is that, and here's my fortune cookie, is I had a belief that my level of healing had to match my level of trauma. When in actuality, I had to intentionally take small bites or baby steps, which in doing those actions, because on paper it seems really simple, which it is, but I also realized that my body and brain were using the simplicity as a reason to justify not taking a different action, because I was more comfortable in the chaos or the overwhelm that I was in trying to stretch that and flex that. And so I wanted to acknowledge that too, because like from what I've studied and understand is that every one of those intentional responses versus reactions build what are called episodic memory, to your point of almost evidence for resiliency and being able to make adjustments quicker, to where when we get triggered or we get overwhelmed, that our body's default is no longer to shut down because it has an evidence bank of, oh, this has happened before. Here's what I did. Here's that state change I went to. Here's how I journaled that thought out. And contrary to what most people believe, and I love your acknowledgement, so thank you, received, it's because I struggled understanding as a kid and didn't do well in school. And I obsess about people feeling seen, heard, and understood, which is why I communicate so much to be able to help. But it's funny because I have a brain similar to yours, but if you were to look at me in my natural state, it's not in a room full of people. It's hiding in the corner alone. It's like a muscle that I flex like every single day because it's like a gym for me. And so I resonate so deeply with what you say, which is why I'm the relationship guy, because I'm like, no, I do this all day. Every time I stand on stage, I am drenched in sweat. My heart rate's like 145 beats a minute. And I'm like, all right, well, this is my workout. Here's where I'm going to go. Here's how I'm going to do this. But thank you for acknowledging that. And I think too, just from personal experience, I struggled so long with so many mental health issues and depression and suicide ideations and frustrations and imposter syndrome and overwhelm. And everything felt so complicated and I didn't understand it. And I didn't realize there was so much power in just actually taking these small actions, regardless of how I felt, to even give myself the possibility to bring things back into alignment, or being willing to shift what was happening in front of me, and realizing that just because I did it one way and it served me to that point doesn't mean that way is going to serve me forever. And truthfully, to what you said, it's at the deepest level, is it aligned with me? Like, do I wake up excited to do it this way, or to sell this way, or to serve this way, or to coach this way? And I've realized that if I'm not lit up about how I do it, I can't do it. And it's just really delaying the inevitable, which is this place of pain. And so I love that you said that. And so where would the next step be?
Well, it's maybe not the next step, George, but just following from what you've said, I think, and you're a testament to this, and I like to say I am as well, is I think, rather than feel, that you can only make that determination about whether this is right for me, whether this is aligned, whether this is me and my fully expressed self, so forth, when you know yourself. And again, that might sound very obvious, but what I mean by know yourself is know and accept. So, and I really want to keep bringing that word into this conversation as well, is to understand yourself, to understand what does drive you on a neurobiological level, what are the things that are just foundationally how your brain and body works. And yes, we can tweak those things, but I think there is a lot of, particularly in psychology, accounts for a lot of this, to be honest, in terms of psychological interventions pushing us to do things, particularly over the sort of cognitive behavioural theory, particularly part of psychology. I actually shared this in, sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, I shared it in a podcast earlier this week, interview of I, in myself, and this will explain, I hope this is okay, I'll just go off on this tangent for a sec. I had lived much of my life conceptualizing, so understanding myself as a very introverted and therefore highly socially anxious person. And I had made sense of that by my early life experiences. So I grew up with my parents' work. They moved frequently around a fairly large state of Australia to very remote places often, but I was moving every couple of years, starting new schools, new friends, all of that sort of jazz. And most people that know that will know that, and even if you don't, you know what that might be like. And so I had attributed my difficulties in certain social situations and in certain environmental situations being a combination of my temperament and my life experience, and simply that. And then as I got into my psychology journey and my own healing journey and the predominant theories that were around at the time, which is, okay, you have a disorder, Sascha, something is wrong with you. You have a fundamental fear of being negatively evaluated by other people. And that's what drives these responses in social settings, and when I'm saying social, like in group settings where I have to introduce myself, something very simple, say, hi, my name's Sascha and I'm from wherever. That would cause a physical panic attack reaction in myself, although it wouldn't be evident to others. So the treatment for that from a psychological perspective is exposure therapy. That is, keep doing the thing that makes you feel anxious until a point that you habituate or no longer, and there's a complex process around that. So that's what I've done my whole life. I have always pushed myself into situations that never feel comfortable for me. And what I have now realised, this is probably a different conversation, one that I had earlier this week, is through the lenses of looking at my kids and their development and more research that's happened in the last 20, 30 years, is that I actually have some fundamental differences in the way that my brain, this prefrontal region, works, that accounts for a lot of my overstimulation and difficulties in certain situations. I hope I'm making sense here. So it wasn't simply just my temperament and my life experiences. There was something more foundational in terms of my design. And I'm not necessarily talking about human design. That opens up a whole other conversation, but it's probably something similar along those lines. My design in terms of my biology. And I'm actually grateful that I had that experience, and this is the thing of life, isn't it? Leaning into saying this has been my pathway and this is now what I can learn myself and share with others, is as I'm glad I was raised and grew up in that and was educated in that way of being, because my life would have been very different if I hadn't pushed myself in that way. I have no doubt I wouldn't have the career that I have and the education that I have and the life experiences that I've had. I wouldn't be here without that. However, the flip side of that has meant a lot of discomfort, a lot of pain throughout my life in doing that. So I'm now with conceptualizing, re-understanding myself, and this, I think there's an inevitability of this coming in your midlife as well, 30s and 40s sort of stage of life. Through now what I know and how I understand the brain on a deeper level, because science understands the brain and it understands the experience, particularly of neurodiversity for women in particular, as much of the research has been up on men until this point in time, to say, okay, this actually makes sense. This is why I'm the way that I am. This is why I feel these things. Now, it doesn't give me, well, this is how I land. It doesn't give me permission to say, oh, okay, so I can just be that person in the corner, not talking to anybody and in my own world, although that is a favoured place of mine often, because I come back to my mission and my values, because I know on a deeper level, yes, that there's a part of me that really loves and needs that space and solitude and so forth, but I'm here for so much more as well. And so I guess where I'm coming back to this point is to then make that determination when you're in the right state of mind. Is this the business design and offers the right thing for me? Am I doing the things? Am I pushing myself enough? Or am I pushing myself too much? Comes through actually deeply knowing and understanding all parts of yourself. And the word I've used, and I might have just used it quite flippantly without explaining, it's a bit of a psyche term, and George, you can probably help me with something to simplify it, is conceptualizing, formulating, putting the pieces together of myself and my life to understand what makes me tick, what motivates and enables me to be my best and do my best, and then what is the opposite. So I think there's a point in that. I think it's knowing yourself deeply.
Yeah, and I think the way that I would summarize that is like, even framing this of like knowing yourself doesn't have a finish line. It's almost like a childlike curiosity to discovering yourself. And to your point on how I relate this, you're like, there's a part of me that would like to like hide in the corner. And the truth is that if that was aligned with your mission and vision, there would be nothing wrong with doing that.
Exactly.
Right. But it's
Exactly.
finding this, for lack of better perspective, you could go, Nicole LePera, the holistic psychologist route of like future self journaling of like, who do you want to be? What impact do you want to make? And how do you want to make it? And then allowing this continuous curiosity and evolution of like, well, where can I stretch myself? Like, where can I quote unquote work out that's going to help me become that person? And in the process, where can I stop working out that is no longer serving me getting there? Right. And like, for me, I genuinely break it down into just 3 core buckets besides the business, which is my heart, right? Like what brings me joy, what lights me up, right? My faith, the alignment, like, am I spending my time in the places that I want to spend my time based on what I value, right? And for me, that's like, I value time with people. I value connection. Like, I value having memories with friends, being able to jump on and do calls like this, right? So it's like my heart, like, is my heart genuinely happy and fulfilled? And then my mind, is my mindset, my mind, my view of the world aligned with who I want to be in the future? And then my physical body is, have I taken care of this vehicle or vessel to be in alignment or integrity with like what I want to achieve, and have the energy that I want to achieve it and the capacity to achieve what I want to achieve? And for me, like, just simplifying it down into those buckets, it's really easy for me to say like, oh, look, like my mindset's positive, like I'm taking care of my body, but like my heart's not in this. Like, I don't feel excited about this. And I think it's just, for anybody listening, it's finding the buckets for you that, like, and I say this all the time, because like when I coach people on this, like, scaling businesses, I'd say 99 times out of 100 has nothing to do with the business itself. It has everything to do with how you see it, what you want to achieve, and that are the habits, behaviors in alignment with you becoming that person to run it. And so everybody gets to kind of figure out what it is that lights you up and brings you joy. Like, to your point, it could be your zone of genius, right? To another person's point, it could be what you do with the work that you're fulfilling, and like, what are you buying back? And I say this all the time, is that like, we spend all of our time building a relationship with everyone but the one person we're guaranteed to spend the rest of our life with, which is us, and knowing how we tick and what lights us up and like what brings us joy, and also allowing the seasons of growth and change to happen inside of it is how I categorize like knowing yourself. Because if you were to tell me and introduce me to today's version of myself 5 years ago, I would have been like, I will never be that man. You are out of your mind. And now I'm like, oh my God, I love my life. I love how I operate. I love, the things that I do. And I think it's just this constant curiosity is how I would break that down in the conceptualizing of like, just truly what brings you joy, what makes you tick, and even outside of the business. Because the other big mistake that I see is people allow their businesses to dictate their identity instead of allowing their identity to dictate their business.
Yes. And not directly on that point, but it's just been stuck in my mind, and I can't recall if you said it in our previous chat off air or since we've been live, is this notion of discernment, or the phrase discernment. And I feel like discernment is such a powerful word. Being able to discern, decide, decipher, all of the D's, I guess, what is the right path of action or decision or so forth, that we're better able to do that to bring it back to ourselves, when we understand ourselves, when we've done the work, as you've described, to say this is how, and this is a bit of an aside, but the sort of components that I like to think about that you need to know about yourself, because that is a very general phrase, and again, it's what you're sort of tapping into, George, is to understand your brain design. So do understand, are you more in the neurotypical sort of space, you sort of see and process things like the vast majority of people, or are you a bit more atypical? And not even necessarily in diagnostic categories, I'm not actually meaning that, but just understanding what are your preferences, and owning those and acknowledging those, and saying if you are a little bit more overwhelmed than others, that's okay. There is a spectrum of experience. So know your brain design. Then know your programming. So this is, if you think of the foundation, this is what you're born with. What has then been the environment? What has been the impact of the environment that you've been exposed to, particularly in your early years, that has shaped how your brain then works with that foundation being given. So this is what we're talking about then, is how early life experiences shape the beliefs that we hold about ourselves. So it's a threefold thing for me. It's a triangle. That's why I'm doing that. I'll put my pen down. What we believe about ourselves, what we believe about others and our relationship with others, and what we believe about the world to be. These are our core foundational beliefs. And it comes back to a point that you said earlier, is because of both the sophistication of our brain, but also the amount of stimulus that stimuli, I always get those words wrong, the amount of stuff that we are exposed to in every day, that our brain needs to make sense of, needs to process. In those very early years of development, it creates categories, filters, boxes, in order to filter information to make it easier to take in all the stuff. Or what it does do is says, there is way too much for me to decipher. I'm just going to pick out the bits which I know to be that I've had experience with before. So if you've had experiences that aren't that favourable, that have created the experience of, I'm not really that good, I'm not that worthwhile, I'm not that valuable as an individual, other people aren't trustworthy, or they aren't reliable, the world is a scary place, a dangerous place, then they're the buckets that we're going to be filling. I'm probably butchering that metaphor a little bit, or complicating it. They're the buckets that we're going to be seeing or seeing in our experience and putting into our buckets. And just to give that I like to, in my mind, I'm a very visual thinker, which is often why I'm looking away, is think about what's actually happening in our brain, and what's happening in our developing brain as a little infant, is that experience is actually creating neural pathways, connections in the brain that have just then become reinforced. They grow over time, based on, again, filtering in and only taking in the stuff that we already have experienced. So to come back to something you said earlier, George, when we've done some work and we've really gone into being truthful about what are the beliefs that I hold about myself, the world, and others, this is the programming piece. When we develop some insight and awareness into that those things maybe certainly aren't true and definitely aren't serving us, and want to contemplate changing those, we are changing a hugely complex beast in terms of our brain and in all of its connections through our body. So I really want to stress just how hard, and hard in the sense of we're changing a physical structure. And that's why it is so difficult, and why we default back to, and when we're under stress, we're more likely to default back to this old programming. And again, not judging ourselves or beating ourselves up for that. That is just the reality. And for those of us that have had those experiences really early on in life, what I think to be true, and what I know clinically to be true, is it means we are going to be more vulnerable to having to do the work and play the very long game of our life. And that's where acceptance comes in, as well as going, okay, yeah, I have had this experience in life, which means I'm very vulnerable to dropping into these states of thinking. I'm very vulnerable, and that's why I need to really take care of myself on a foundational level, because that's going to give me the most buffer in my system to be able to counter this stuff. And B, that it is going to be a lifelong journey. And I know, and I say that with the greatest of empathy and understanding, because I know that is so tiring for so many people to know that it feels very unfair, and it is unfair. But there is no alternative.
Mm-hmm.
So know your brain, know your programming. All of that then determines what we're talking about when you said around our propensity or our tendency towards reactivity or responsiveness. I would say that is your emotional awareness, your emotional intelligence, your emotional regulation capacity. How well can you experience something? You said be tickled, or could be triggered. I say activated. Something has been activated in me. How well can I notice that, sit with it, observe it, be curious about it, think about that experience, my reaction internally, before I react externally. Mm-hmm. That is, for me, emotional intelligence. Again, it's a fancy term. I don't think it's actually that helpful. It's emotional regulation. Being in a situation, being activated by something there, which is activating something deep in us, stopping, being able to pause, think about that experience, and then determine what our response is going to be. Mm-hmm. So brain design, programming feeds your emotional responsiveness, reactivity, regulation. For me, that's the essence of who you are on a neurobiological sort of level there. You also need to be super clear, and we've referenced this so many times, about what your values are. And again, that word gets thrown around a lot, but deeply, what do I stand for? What gives me meaning? What lights me up? And then doing the more tricky part, which is then looking at your life and saying, is my life actually aligned with what I say I want my life to be? And from a mental health sort of perspective, I don't know why I said mental health sort of perspective, but anyway, from a well-being perspective or life satisfaction, we know very clearly, and I would see this time and time again clinically, the main reason that a lot of people come because they're depressed, anxious, overwhelmed, is because they're living a life that isn't aligned with what they want it to be or what is important to them. And so I just want to acknowledge again, it's really simple, but that means invariably that will mean feeling crappy. Mm-hmm. So that's going to then mean making some hard decisions about bringing those pieces together. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then I've already sort of gotten to that fifth component. All of that sequencing will determine essentially how well you're functioning on a mental, physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual lens. So again, we're often trying to get to this end point of feeling better. What do I do over here? Well, to fix this here, if you want to feel better over here, you need to understand all of this, and probably I would then say, and you've referenced it already, is make some hard choices about what you need to commit to on a daily basis, the simple stuff that will shore up your foundations to optimize your brain to then make good choices, essentially.
Yeah, I love this, and I gotta start landing the plane. And this reminds me, I've referenced this interview a few times, and I don't know if you've ever watched it, but there was a session that Mike Tyson did with Sadhguru. You want to talk about a pattern interrupt, right? A spiritual leader with, Mike Tyson. But, earlier to your point on conceptualization and tying this together, the way that Sadhguru said this, and to give full credit, he's like, we're born into this life and we expect to know how to drive the car, but we never take time to read the owner's manual of our own life, right? And what you're talking about is understanding how your vehicle operates, like how your brain operates and how you see it based on your life experiences and situations and events, both good and quote unquote bad, right? And then how your emotions respond to those thoughts and those feelings that we have, but having this curiosity of like just reading the owner's manual. And like, truthfully, like, to be cheesy, is like the hand that we were dealt was dealt.
Yes.
And so you can either pretend
Yes.
that it's not there or beg for a new one, but there's no other hand coming. But if you play the hand in front of you, you can turn it into anything that you would like to turn it into.
Yes.
And I love your acknowledgement of it, because even in my life and the things that I've experienced, I look back now and I'm like, if you gave me the option, I wouldn't change a thing. It's the reason I'm the father I am, the friend that I am, that we're connected. Like there's so much in it. And I joke with people too, like, I forget that when you ask God to move mountains, you wake up with a shovel, right? And I posted this the other day and I said, all too often I've prayed for things that I don't have the character and scars to maintain. And I think that that's the point of purpose, is to become this person. And I think it's an invitation. And I also would say of like going back and also understanding that, Sascha's speaking from, 23 plus years of clinical experience and living through this. And I don't feel qualified at all to coach people on this, but yet it's the thing that everything shows up on my plate. And they're like, we just kind of like I've lived this approach. But this isn't just, it comes into your awareness and it magically fixes itself. It's something that you revisit over and over and over. And I feel like it's a lifelong commitment
Yes.
to happiness, right? Because like happiness for me comes from purpose, and purpose comes on the other side of my perspective shifting most of the time through what I would consider painful experiences, like the things I value with my son, the things I value in business, the things I value in my relationships have come on the other side of these quote hard conversations or shifts in parts and pieces of my life. And so even if you're listening to this and any of it tickled, I would invite you to give yourself some space and also come back and listen to it, because there's no finish line in
Yeah.
this. Just like you can plant a seed in a garden, but if you ignore it, it's never going to grow. You have to water it and tend to it and prune it and sometimes replant it. And I feel like that's the way in which to see our self-actualization, which is living in a position of a positive perspective of empowerment, of like, I am the result and living in the result of the choices I've made leading up to this point, which also means that the choices and decisions that I make today are going to dictate the life that I'm living in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months from now. And no one else is at the driver's seat. We are. And so I love how, number one, how eloquent and all the stories and non sequiturs that came up, because I also love your brain to pieces. And, I geek out about you and I talk about this stuff. And I also feel so validated that there's some semblance of truth to the things that I share from a clinical perspective. But just to overwrap this for everybody, I think the way that I would land this is also, it doesn't necessarily have to be something massive. It could be that you don't like how one thing is working in your life that could be trivial, but the same principles apply, the same models apply. And I think the point that I would resonate and leave everybody with is that there's two sides to this human experience. there's the proactive approach that we take to make sure that we are being or striving or thriving to be the best version of ourselves through understanding our vehicle based on everything we shared in this conversation, and then intentionally changing the oil, checking the tires, making sure it runs effectively every single day in the buckets that make us operate as a biological human. And in that process, also understanding that you can have the best plan, have your car set up all that you want, and you're going to get a flat tire.
Yeah.
And when you get a flat tire, you win when you change it instead of slashing the other three.
Yes.
And the way to change it is to go through what we talked about today. Have an awareness, accept it, have an attitude of gratitude, quite frankly, to be where you are. State change your body, assess your situation, come back to your values and your mission as to like, oh, I don't want to change this tire. I'm like, but you said you wanted to get to that destination, right? And then tying that into intentional action when you're in the right state, and take these micro bites and these moments and allow those every time you get a flat tire to build your confidence, to build your resiliency, to change your perspective, to arm you when it happens again to be able to shorten the gap between flat tire and the tire changed. And I believe that that is truthfully like where purpose and meaning and life comes in, and it can apply in relationships or business or fitness or food or parenting or any of those buckets. And I feel like we have the ability to drive our vehicle to the results that we want. And I know for me, anecdotally, I was convinced that by sitting in the passenger seat, somebody else was going to get me there. And then I realized that nobody else can see my vision. And the only way I'm going to get there is if I drive the car. So that's how I would summarize today.
Whew. As I said, I wish I had those parts of my brain, of your brain, in my brain, in being able to bring
I
that.
wouldn't be able to do that without your brain. And so this is the gift, and I'm so glad that we're friends, and I love you to pieces. And I'm so grateful that you were here today. We're going to have to do like a part 2 or a part 3 because there is so much more to unpack. So for everybody listening, I'm going to have all of Sascha's info linked in the show notes, but would you give everybody your Instagram just so everybody has a place to connect with you? Because I know as much as you're introverted, you also love connecting with people, because we've connected deeply on Instagram. So would you share your Instagram?
So the DMs are great for me with the one-to-one exchange. So I encourage you to say hi. So it's Dr.Sascha, S-A-S-C-H-A. So mine's a bit tricky. .K, Dr.Sascha.K.
I love it. And I invite, and if I could force you, I want to force all of you to send her a DM, because she's incredible. We connected on DMs, and that one-to-one is great. And if anything landed or resonated, please send her your love, send her your gratitude, and we will definitely have you back. It would be an honor and a pleasure. And maybe next time I won't make you wake up at 5:30 in the morning. I apologize about that.
That's my optimal time zone, actually.
Oh, look at me projecting my view of the world onto you. And you're like, no, that's my optimal time. See, it even happens. It happens all the time. And so thank you for being here. For everybody listening, the way that I would phrase this one is take this as an invitation just to look, just to observe, just to see, and take anything from today and put it into practice, because I promise you the muscle works if you work it, but it does not work itself. And so practice it.
With that, George, I really think it's an important thing to round that off in terms of that idea of, I guess, what you're describing as radical responsibility and ownership for your life. I totally am with you. We need to have an equal dose of self-compassion with that attitude as well. Is yes, I am in the driver's seat. It is all up to me. But yeah, life has been hard, or my experience at the moment is hard. Excuse me. So just always leading with love. I know that sounds so corny, but for yourself, and doing simply throughout the day, do it regularly, hand on your heart. This is just such a powerful little strategy that will enable you to do that, to lead with compassion for yourself, number one. And then the rest will follow.
1,000%. I'm so glad you said that. That's the best place to land the plane. And so it's almost like this whole podcast is teaching you how to love yourself, which I say every single time, 1,000%, with grace, with empathy, with compassion, and also just gratitude that what got us here served us. And now we have the ability to change it. So love the process, love yourself. and we're both here to support you. And so everybody have a beautiful day. You'll either see me in the next episode or you will hear me in your earballs, but either way, we're out.